right, so in today's theory lesson, we're going to be covering inversions, and this will help your understanding of chords and just how they appear in music in general. So let me put this in present mode. Okay, so basically what an inversion is you're flipping two notes upside down or putting them in a different order. So when we think about inversions, just think about it like rearranging the notes in a chord. You're just putting the notes of the chord in a different order. For example, these two notes, we have F and A. The F is in the bass, so it's the lower note of the two, and A is the upper note, it's on top. When we invert this interval, the A will become the lowest note and the F will become the highest note as we bring it up an octave. What happens when we invert intervals is they actually change qualities, and the distance between them obviously becomes different. So let's take a major second and a minor seventh. A major second, it looks like right here, you have C and D natural. Those two notes on a keyboard are very close together. They're touching. So we have a major second there. Now, if we were to take the C and bring it up an octave, there would obviously be a bigger space in between the two notes. So from D to C natural is a minor seventh. Anytime we invert intervals like this between major and minor, there's going to be a change in quality. Let's look at thirds. So a minor third, we have here C and E flat. That makes up the interval of a minor third. When you take the C and bring it up an octave, the E flat becomes the lowest note, and the distance between those two notes is actually a major sixth. Now, when we learn how each of these sounds, it's really easy to find different songs that contain these intervals so that you can kind of memorize that interval in your ear that way. That's really the best way, I think, to get your ear to recognize these different intervals. You can look at them on the staff, but until you have sort of an oral understanding of them, it kind of, just puts things into context more. So this is what happens when you invert seconds and thirds. They become sevenths and sixths. Now, I didn't include a slide in this presentation about perfect fourths and perfect fifths, but the cool thing about perfect fourths and perfect fifths, they are inversions of each other. So the interval of a perfect fifth, let's just take C to G, for example. If you brought C up an octave, it would become a perfect fourth. Because perfect fourths and perfect fifths don't have a major or minor quality, they're just either a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth, you don't have to worry about the quality changing. They're already perfect, so you're just basically flipping the order of those two notes. Okay. So I have included on this presentation a link to musictheory.net. They have some really good exercises if you want to practice identifying intervals. I think this would be really valuable. The only thing is that it's a little bit confusing, the interface, and I don't agree with how they have all of these different intervals that really aren't, it's not, for our intents and purposes, we are not going to be looking at augmented and diminished intervals because that just gets way too theoretical, and the spelling of these intervals gets in the way of the practicality. I'm all about practicality. You know that. So we're just going to focus on major, minor, and perfect intervals. So you're going to have to go into the exercises on this website, click the little cog in the top right-hand corner, and then you'll see a menu pop up. You're going to want to go to intervals, click on that, and then just make sure that only the boxes that I've highlighted in red are checked. You don't want any of the diminished intervals, and you don't want any of the augmented intervals, because it will just become way too complicated, unnecessarily complicated. Okay? All right. So after you are really comfortable with your intervals, that's the distance between two notes, now we're going to jump ahead to inversions with triads. Triads, as we remember, are three notes in a group, with that Greek prefix there of tri, tri. Three notes, like a triangle, triads in a chord. All right, so a triad in root position means that the tonic note is the lowest note of the chord, or as we like to call it in the music theory world, in the bass. So basically, if there is a note in the bass, whether it be at the bottom of a chord or actually a separate note in the bass clef, which we will talk about more in later lessons, that still counts as a root position chord. So what we are looking for here, I like to kind of visually look at root position chords like they're snowmen. If the snowman is, the snowman has three notes stacked on top, just like the big mounds of snow. And if they are evenly stacked in thirds, that's a good indicator that your chord is in root position. Also, the root of the chord should be the lowest note in each of these triads. I would also like to point out the different notation on top of the chords here. This is called lead sheet notation, and it's really common in popular music, in jazz. If you ever see like a pop piano songbook, they'll have chord symbols that are above each chord. And this is a notation system that uses letters, and it's pretty straightforward. So you kind of know what the chord is without having to write out C major, E minor, G augmented, A diminished, that kind of thing. We use these symbols. The augmented symbol is the plus sign. The diminished symbol is a little degree sign. This is all review. It depends on where you are and what, who your teacher is, but a lot of times minor will be in lowercase and the M will have a little bar over it, and then major is almost always capitalized. But it depends on the book, it depends on the editor. So this is just one way of writing these lead sheet symbols. Okay, enough of that. We're going to go on to first inversion triads. So remember that inversion simply means to rearrange the notes of chords. In first inversion triads, the third scale degree is in the bass. So let's look at C major over here. We know that the third scale degree of a C major scale, right, is our E natural. E natural is the third scale degree, and it is in a C major triad, right? We have the root, the third, and the fifth. So the root has been moved from the bass position all the way up an octave. And now we have a new bass note, which is E. In the other examples, we also see that the third scale degree is the bass note for all of these. A change here in the notation, the lead sheet way of notating a first inversion chord is to actually put the chord quality, so C major chord, then write a slash, and then put the letter name of the lowest note. So your bass note always is under that slash. I hope this is making sense. Now we're going on to second inversion triads. Same process here of inverting. We take the fifth scale degree, that's in the bass. The root remains in the spot that it was in the first inversion. And then your third scale degree actually moves up an octave. So we're just shifting that lowest note up an octave each time we invert. So the second inversion has your fifth scale degree in the bass. And these are actually used for special purposes when we talk about it in a bigger context. So we won't get to that in this lesson, but I want to just make you aware that second inversion chords are special and they have their own kind of really cool function that we will talk about later on. So just remember, second inversion are the special ones. Root position is always special. First inversion is kind of like, kind of nice, but doesn't really have a special purpose too much. Okay. And then finally, you can have chords in third inversions. They're not as common as first and second inversions. And the reason being, third inversions only happen when there are 4 notes in a chord, right? So let's take this 7th chord, for example. We have a C dominant 7th chord, or as some people like to refer to it, a major minor 7th. This is all review. A major minor 7th happens when you have a major triad and you add that minor 7th interval from the root to the highest note. Major triad, minor 7th. So a major minor 7th chord. So third inversions can only happen when there are 4 notes in a chord. The 4 different arrangements of a 7th chord are obviously root position, first inversion, second inversion, or third inversion. And in third inversion, the 7th scale degree is in the bass. So as you can see over here, we have our B flat as the lowest note, and it is right up against that C root. This is not really, as I've said before, not the most common arrangement, simply because it's sort of unstable to have the 7th note of a 7th chord be in the bass, but it can happen. So great. Now let's just look at this melody for an example of how inversion can be used outside of chords. Inversion really just means flipping it upside down. So in this treble staff, you can tell that it's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Do, do, sol, sol, la, la, sol, fa, fa, mi, mi, re, re, do. And in the bass clef, it's actually a little bit different here. So I'm going to show you how the intervals remain exactly the same from the original melody and the inversion in the bass. So when the melody goes up by a perfect fifth, the inversion is in the opposite direction. Now, there are different ways that you can invert. You can invert by keeping the intervals the same, but just changing the direction. Or you can actually invert the intervals as well. So this could actually be C to G would be a perfect fourth, and that perfect fourth would be an inversion of your perfect fifth interval. So there are different ways to invert. Usually when you see an inversion of a melody like this, they don't actually invert the intervals, but it's still possible. But yeah, it's just to show you that sometimes this can be used as a compositional tool to Well, I've seen it a lot in theme and variations. You'll have a theme, like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is a theme. And one of the variations, the composer will just play the inversion all by itself. And it's interesting because it sounds like a different melody, but there's something about it that kind of retains the same contour and the same motion as the original. As you notice, the rhythms have not changed. So the rhythms stay the same, but it's just the difference in intervals and the direction where it's going. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation on inversions. It will really come in handy when we start to talk about chord analysis and how to spot different chords in a piece of music. And I think that's it for today. So go back and do the inversion exercises on musictheory.net. And I believe they also have, if you sort of dig around in their site, ear training exercises as well as chord inversion tutorials and exercises.